tools that can help. We are going to talk about this topic in our educational session with Dr. Sonam Bhimbra. Dr. Sonam is Doctor of Naturopathic Medicine and Master of Science in Integrative Medicine with her research focus on kids' anxiety and ADHD. I am Amita from NourishDoc, a platform for natural and holistic therapies. I am excited to introduce all of you to Dr. Sonam Bhimbra. Welcome, Dr. Sonam.
Thank you, Amita. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Great. So let's just get started. Why are the kids so stressed out? It's
Yeah.
beyond us.
I mean, there's so many reasons, and we can just look at why we're so stressed out. I often say, like, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. But I'm so excited to be here and share what I've been learning about anxiety and ADHD, not only from an integrative research perspective, which is very robust in this area, but also what parents in my consulting practice have been asking me, especially recently. And I want you to know that I've seen a variety of different presentations experience dramatic improvements with just very small tweaks, very simple naturopathic things. And that's why I love working with kids, because how quickly they respond to just diet or energy medicine or just simple suggestions that you could start incorporating today. I truly believe kids are in many ways more attuned and resilient than we give them credit for. And in terms of their neural wiring and what we know about neuroplasticity and the capacity to change our brains, they have an advantage compared to adults in some ways in rewiring their brains and undoing programming because it just hasn't been ingrained as long. So giving them the tools now while they're young is one of the best things we can do. Not only for them, but our future generations and our success as a society. So let's get to it. What is anxiety? And we also are incorporating a little bit of ADHD. How can it get confused for ADHD? Why are kids feeling so much of it? And what can we do about it? So worries and fears are natural. That's an adaptive part of childhood and development, and anxiety and fear meet the criteria for a clinical anxiety disorder when the concerns are persistent, excessive, and cause noticeable distress or impairment in day-to-day life. So why are kids feeling so much of it? Like I said, let's look to the adults. When parents bring their kids in for whether it's like fatigue or some social anxiety or something, I often ask them, what's your level of anxiety? What are your tools? How are you coping? And a lot of the time the parents tell me, like, I'm very stressed. I'm very anxious, actually. And I'm like, you're coming here for your kid, but we gotta work on you too. Sometimes just helping the parent and providing tools for the parent creates a ripple effect for their kids, because we are so connected, especially to our babies, and they're just like little sponges. So some studies are saying that kids are actually experiencing more anxiety than adults. And I wish I had included this graph from the American Psychological Association, and it compares rates of stress and stressors between the elderly, boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. And Gen Z is like those born between 96 and 2015. And they're worried about things. So it had, like, the graph had what types of stressors they have. This was in 2018. So they're worried about things like climate change, rise in suicide rates, mass shootings, separation and deportation of immigrant and migrant families, sexual harassment. And we can safely say in 2020, we can add a lot of things to that list: fear of contagion, fear of medical treatments, fear of racial inequities, economic depression. Like, there's a lot of things that they're experiencing. I think I saw a statistic somewhere that said kids in high school now have more stress or more cortisol than adults in the Great Depression did, or something like that. So they have tremendous pressures externally on them. And of course, another commonly cited reason for increasing rates of childhood anxiety and depression is social media. I love reading about media theory. I find it so fascinating. And I was reading a book where the author described social media as an extension of our nervous system. When we get a notification or that buzz or that sound, it creates an actual change in our physiology. Like the likes give you dopamine hits, and it's very addictive. So our nervous systems are just kind of always on, like we don't get to turn them off. We know it's just always there. So then there's that feeling of FOMO, or a fear of missing out, like, oh, what are my friends doing? What's going on over here? What's going on? Like we as adults, sometimes we're like, what's going on in the world? What's happening today? We're like doom scrolling. And our nervous systems just aren't designed for that level of information intake that excessively. So a lot of my work is around, let's work on the nervous system. Let's help you feel a sense of calm. Let's help you regulate a little bit more and not be so driven or impacted by external stimuli. Let's work from the inside out. The other thing is, anxiety is often perceived as a bad thing, but it's a crucial part of our wiring. It's a part of our internal guidance system. It alerts us of things that our body and our brain deem important, whether it's that example of the tiger, or whether it's like performing or a test. We need that anxiety to help us perform our best and to achieve things and to innovate. But like many other tools of our mind, it's there to work for us, not against us. So when is it working against you? When you perceive threats, when you're actually safe. So sometimes kids will have these fears, these phobias of certain things, but they're not actually a threat to them. And when it's intrusive and repetitive, then it can be an issue. When it's taking a toll on our self-esteem and our confidence, and when it interferes with our daily life, that's a really big indicator of when it's becoming an issue. I also want to mention that some parents shy away from having their child evaluated because of fear of a diagnosis or their child being labeled as a problem kid or troublemaker. And I completely understand that. As there's a lot of work to be done in terms of stigma in mental health, but I like to encourage evaluation for a couple reasons. One is it can help rule out other conditions that might present similarly, like learning disorders, hearing disorders, vision impairment. They might not be able to hear very well in the classroom, or they can't see, so they're not doing well. And it could be simple things like that, that you could be like, oh, my child actually doesn't have the disorder I thought. He's hyperactive for this reason. And a diagnosis can also help provide access to resources and services that wouldn't be available otherwise. So that's useful to note, because people living below the poverty line or those in marginalized groups tend to have higher rates of anxiety and childhood psych disorders that are going unaddressed. And there's services, there's resources available for them. And I also like to talk about the gifts of these disorders. I don't even like using the word disorder, but I've been so indoctrinated with like medical jargon and everything. But I'll talk about that a little bit later. So how to recognize symptoms in your child. I think we can probably go to the next slide. So they tell you, they can communicate it. They'll tell you that they're feeling worried, they're feeling bad thoughts or repetitive thoughts. They might have poor sleep or bad dreams. They might have appetite changes. They might be very rigid about how they do things. They could become very irritable. They could become very angry or violent. They might have negative, pessimistic thoughts. They can be fidgety, restless. They might be using the bathroom very often. They can start crying often, become very clingy, have a lot of separation anxiety, and they might just have physical complaints like skin issues, headaches, tummy aches, muscle tension, pain, hair loss, or other physical complaints that aren't explained by other causes. And so I want to talk about the relationship between anxiety and ADHD real quick. Sometimes they can look like each other. A child that might be very like fidgety or I keep asking to go to the bathroom, they might get labeled as disruptive, but that just might be the presentation of their anxiety. So when they get put on those ADHD medications, which work very differently from anxiety medications, they're not really doing much, because that's not actually what the issue was. That just might be their presentation of anxiety. And same vice versa for ADHD. They might have, like, it could be a physical restlessness, but there's also that mental restlessness that they might have, like these negative thoughts or different presentations that might look like anxiety that are actually ADHD. So that's another reason I recommend working with a professional to see what's really going on with your kid. So a question that often comes up, I think you can go to the next slide, is my child normal? Is this just a part of their personality, or is this something else? And like I said, that's a really good question. What's normal for one kid is it's very variable. It depends on age. It depends on a variety of factors. So to get more clarity around that question, it's helpful to work with a professional. But what I like to tell parents as an indicator is this getting in the way of them living their full life? Is it inhibiting them? Are they able to access their gifts, or are they inhibiting their gifts? Sometimes people will say, oh, my child's been anxious or fearful since they were an infant or they were a toddler. That's just how they've always been. That would just lead me to ask more questions about the mother's pregnancy, how that was. I get a lot of really, really good information about the child and the child's health from that. Anxiety and depression in the parents, in the family, and other mood or behavioral disorders in the family, among other things. So the gifts of ADHD. These are incredibly gifted and intelligent children. There's now actual literature, scientific literature, that shows that their brains work differently. There's more creativity. They're able to tap into this nonlinear thinking, which is deemed kind of a problem, but it's actually allowing them to access different parts of the brain and think outside of the box and just be very, very creative. A lot of these children are very emotionally intelligent. They can be very intuitive. They can walk into a room and really access what everyone is feeling, what the collective is experiencing. So sometimes they're just picking up on different emotions. So sometimes we just have to teach them boundaries and how to know what feelings are theirs and what feelings they're actually picking up on. And this goes for a lot of adults as well. I remember seeing a meme recently where it said, raise your hand if you were in the gifted and talented program as a child, and now you have like anxiety and depression as an adult. And it was supposed to be like a joke kind of thing, but so many people resonated with that. It was really interesting. I feel like I resonate with that a little bit. So like I was saying, there's documented research on differences in the cognition and association with uninhibited imaginations. We see artists, creative types, but these gifts can be misperceived by society and culturally, and that's significant. The cultural components are also very important to me when I'm taking a history. So there's actually strong evidence that individuals from non-Western cultures report more somatic symptoms versus psychological, which is interesting. There's documented evidence that Black and Latino boys with symptoms of anxiety or ADHD are often labeled as troublemakers, and this translates into unchecked anxiety later on and being criminalized later in life, which is very harmful as a society. This has very huge ramifications and impacts to our entire society. And it's also harmful to the little girls, the little Indian girl, the little Asian girl, the little white girl that have ADHD that go years without a diagnosis or tools to help them thrive. That's not really serving them either. So there's an increase in non-drug therapies. So that's what I've included. That's what I'll be talking about. If you want to talk about pharmacological approaches, you can message me. We can discuss that separately. That's a huge topic alone. And many of these are supportive, even if the child is already taking medications, and the self-regulation techniques are useful for just about everyone. So stop me if I'm going too fast. I feel like I'm like just like shooting through this because I have so much information to share.
So I think we can focus on one thing, ADHD and just general anxiety is fine, but maybe focus a little bit on ADHD, and then also
Sure.
when you're thinking about your success story. So that way, we have a focus, and then we can talk about the other overall anxiety in different sessions.
Okay, great. And I just want to add that the ADHD, there are very specific things for ADHD, but what I'm going to include and talk about can apply to both. So they can apply to
Yeah.
anxiety as well, just because, like I said, they can present very, very similarly. So my first recommendation for anxiety and ADHD is find an outlet for creativity, whether it's drawing, painting, building, workbooks, dance, martial arts, physical creativity, or technical creativity. Get that energy moving, so it's not in your head so much. Create something with your hands. Do something that you can bring that down into your body and move it around a little bit. And recognize the unique strengths of your unique quirkiness, of your child's uniqueness, and play to them, not only to create less resistance in routine, but also to give them confidence. Self-esteem is a big aspect to them realizing their potential. So anxious children are sometimes anxious to help too. These hyperactive, restless children are sometimes anxious to do something. They want to help with chores, tasks, cleaning, just participate, bring them in. It's really good for their confidence as well. So another thing that can be helped and help self-esteem is a clear mind, and a clear surrounding can help that too. So less clutter, more routine, less overwhelm. Shut off the news, adult stressors, try not to talk about them in front of your children. They pick up on these things a lot. Take news fast, especially now that kids' lives have been very disrupted this year. And they're actually very exposed to a lot of stressors, and their parents are as well. So they might be becoming more demanding or clingy or whatever, and needing more from the parent. The parent itself is feeling very pressured. So it becomes this cycle. So just creating a nice space, a haven where they can retreat to with you or alone, incorporate some quiet time, relaxing music, diffusing essential oils like lavender, dim lighting, just to let that nervous system recharge. I really want to put that idea of like, how is their nervous system doing?
Well, I want to ask a question in this. Sorry. So let's say I try to see my kid is, as a parent, someone sees that their child has anxiety issues, and you've written down some of the things like anger, avoidance, negative thoughts. So does that really impact the educational underachievement? Because you've also written on the slide saying that they're associated with educational underachievement, increased risk for depression. So talk a little bit about, what, as a parent, if I see some of these things that you've seen, am I also going to see an underachievement in the educational part of it? How does that correlate a little bit? We
Yeah.
can go to the next ones.
Sure. So in the literature, let me see if I have my notes on the exact statistics. So anxiety disorders are the most common childhood onset psychiatric disorders, and they've been associated with educational underachievement and co-occurring psychiatric conditions. Other anxiety disorders, if a child has social anxiety, they might also have generalized anxiety. They might also have agoraphobia. It also increases their likelihood of having co-occurring psych conditions like depression and oppositional defiant, which can present as that like behavioral issue, anger, and also these functional impairments can persist into adulthood, which is why I like to give these tools early, because they do have such a high rate of persisting. Those anxious toddlers very much often tend to become anxious adolescents and anxious adults. So this rewiring this neural circuitry becomes very strengthened. And so educational underachievement can be associated with that, as well as substance abuse, because there's this, it brings into, there's so much to say about this topic, but let me just focus on like avoidance, for example. Avoiding things that are deemed stressful or unsafe creates this wiring that actually fuels anxiety, because they are avoiding things like, oh, this isn't safe for me to do. It's not safe for me to take this risk or to put myself in this position. And when they don't do it, they are like, okay, I'm safe. My brain is like, I made it, and now I'm going to keep avoiding that. So they're avoiding things, and they're avoiding things that cause them anxiety and stress. Let's say if it's even like something like homework or something like that, that makes them, they don't feel good about, they tend to create this avoidance, fuels this anxiety, and they just create these negative associations around things that that they might very well excel in, but they've just now created this avoidance pattern. So, and like I was saying, anxiety disorders frequently co-occur with other psych disorders, and particularly ADHD, learning disabilities as well, and then depressive disorders in adolescence. So it has long-term consequences. And I think that's why, and this is, you know, what they talk about in the literature and in the medical clinical approach. But for me, it's very important for me that your child's self-esteem is intact and they are aware of how special they are and how competent they are and how capable and resilient that they can be. So child that didn't know that, or that wasn't given tools to access that, often becomes an adult that does not have those tools and doesn't have access or feelings of self-worth and things like that. Does that kind of answer?
Sure, sure. So let's focus. Let's focus. I want our viewers to take away some of the things that they can do. If their kids are having anxiety issues. So let's just focus a little bit on. Let's say someone's child is feeling anxious, which we talked about earlier. So what can they do? So non-drug approaches. So that's what I see in this slide. So let's focus and give them some takeaways that they can do that.
Okay, so just quickly, nutrition, the GI health, there is so much it's becoming more mainstream how intimately the digestive health and the psychological health are. So that's a big one. Other things, improvement in sleep, mindfulness activities, which are free. You can start doing them today. It's not just meditation. It can be things like breathing exercises. It can be things like tapping, other things to like regulate the nervous system. There's botanical medicines that are used. Certain herbs or teas can be very helpful and supportive. And then there's orthomolecular medicine, just means like specific nutrients that correct any deficiencies or imbalances. So that's like supplements. And then there's movement as medicine. And then there's homeopathy. And there's a lot of things, but those are the things that I'll just touch on today. So some take-home messages. Nutrition. If all you do, I have so much research and literature to support all this, but let me just give you the takeaway. If all you do is take out the additives, food colorings, and sugars, processed foods, remove those as much as possible, especially food colorings, because there's a lot of research around that in ADHD specifically. Add lots of vegetables, good fats, protein, just incorporating quality water, clean protein, and fiber is a surefire way to see improvements in health, and even behavior and cognitive performance. In the naturopathic community, we often hear about our patients or clients being thanked by teachers for putting their child on Ritalin when all that changed was their diet. And so this is very individualized. I like to individualize nutrition to the person because they can be eating all the right things, but not even realize that their child has certain sensitivities or has compromised intestinal permeability and isn't fully absorbing all the nutrients. So that's something that when you work with a naturopathic doctor or whoever, they can help you with that. But the general guidelines of just avoiding food additives, colorings, and sugars can really, really help and get them a lot of really good protein. You can notice improvements in anxiety, behavior, and sleep. The other thing, sleep, there are a variety of things to help with that. I really like exercise for sleep, mindfulness therapies, just helping them bring a sense of calm and peace can help that. And I usually see when you do other things or you see improvements in other areas, sleep also gets improved as well. I don't usually see improvements in anxiety without improvements in sleep as well. Some micronutrient therapies that are really interesting. People always want to know what's the new supplement that I can just give. it all works together. It's very holistic, but there's a lot of research on the supportive effects of different minerals, vitamins, amino acids. It can get confusing, so I definitely recommend working with someone to get clarity on what's right for your kid. But some names that come up are zinc, magnesium, which can be also helpful for like muscle tension, headaches, and sleep as well. B vitamins, which are crucial for the brain. L-theanine, which is an amino acid to help improve symptoms of anxiety, increase concentration, improve sleep quality, and it's also non-sedating. There was a double-blind placebo-controlled trial on L-theanine with 90 boys with ADHD, and they were found to have significant improvements in sleep quality with L-theanine. There's pycnogenol, there's omega-3s, there's phosphatidylserine, which is kind of a newer player for ADHD, and it's been shown to be helpful for ADHD as well as high functioning autism. And it's just like it supports a type of fat that's found abundantly in the brain, and it has many roles, including involvement in production of dopamine and acetylcholine. So it helps with like memory, focus, reasoning. A lot of naturopathic students, when they're studying for their board exams, they're taking phosphatidylserine. The other thing, movement as medicine. If there is one thing you do on this list and nothing else, movement, get them active. Family walks, going to the park, getting outside and moving is probably the single biggest recommendation of mine, especially during the pandemic, because the benefits are so multifold. You get time away from screens, time with family, and it's a good creative outlet. Get them on a bike, get them running, get that blood pumping, get their heart rates going. And there's so many benefits to movement for anxiety, for depression, for sleep, for ADHD, for so many things. I'm happy to send you all the research if that's what you need to get motivated, but it just feels good. You get endorphins, and it's just really, really powerful to get moving. We think it's so simple, but the simplest things to do are also the simplest things not to do. So I'm here to just remind you, like, this is going to help. There's even some adults with ADHD that say that if I just do the biggest difference for me accomplishing my tasks and staying focused is my morning run or my morning bike ride or whatever it may be. And so it's interesting, I want to include that there's some research to support that fidgeting that we all often associate with ADHD is purposeful. There was a 2015 study from the University of Mississippi Medical Center that found hyperactivity and ADHD help kids learn rather than hindered them. So it was like movement to get the juices flowing. And there's also research that found that kids with ADHD perform better on tests after exercising. They had less fatigue and confusion, more motivation, more energy, more focus, and more positive feelings. Mindfulness is the other one. Like I was talking about meditation, there's breathing exercises. 4-square breathing is a really common breathing technique that we recommend, which is just breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, and you do a few cycles of that, you are putting your nervous system in a different state entirely. Once you're out of that adrenaline fueled sympathetic fight or flight mode and you go into that more parasympathetic calm state, you're more open for learning, you're more open for digestion, for your gut is able to absorb nutrients better. So being in that state more, and you can do it very, very simply within a few minutes with breathing exercises. Tapping is another one. I've included some resources where you can download apps and you can help your child or yourself learn some tapping techniques because so many emotions are stored in the body. So that's another one. Homeopathy, I saved this for last because if I started talking about this in the beginning of the talk, we wouldn't even get to talk about anything else. It's like my favorite. It's probably the gentlest and the most powerful tool in my toolbox. And it's something that's helped me personally. And I use it with just about every single one of my clients. It is very individualized. So I ask a lot of really in-depth questions to get an understanding of your child's patterns, their susceptibilities and their strengths, and as well as their weaknesses, like why do some children react to stress this way and some react this way? It's very important for me to know the difference. And also some really weird symptoms that parents don't know what to do with, like, why is my child like burrowing in the pillow? Why are they hitting themselves and slapping themselves and scratching themselves? Why are they behaving in these weird kind of ways? Why are they waking up in the middle of the night screaming? It really helps address some of these very specific things to the child. And those are very useful things for me. When I'm selecting a remedy, I usually pick just one. And it is an energetic medicine. A lot of people, when they go to Whole Foods, natural food stores, you see those blue little tubes with the small little pellets. A lot of people that have used arnica, you've used homeopathy before. And it's much more for just first aid or trauma or injury. It can really help on a very deep level to create some shifts for your children. So I know I flew through that. And my main goal is not to overwhelm you with all of these things you can do. I just want to help parents feel like awareness of all the different things that they can try, and also that there is hope, that there is things that you can do. So some success stories.
Yes,
I'm
we have questions coming up. Please get
sure.
ready for questions, but I think we can take them after your talk. So maybe in a few minutes, we'll be ready for the questions as well. So
Sure.
let's go through, one or two success stories, and then we can take the questions.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you about something that I've been seeing coming up a lot in the last 2 weeks alone. I've had 3 parents, they're coming to me for other things, but bring up the fact that their child is having ruminating or obsessive thoughts about death. They are becoming very preoccupied with thoughts of death, whether it's their own death, whether it's the death of their parents, or whatever it may be. And in 2 of the cases, there was a recent death in the family or close friend. It wasn't COVID related. I think there were different reasons, but we're also seeing and hearing about so much death in the news. And with the pandemic, death is coming up a lot. So our kiddos are definitely picking up on that. And, there was one who I think she's like 7 or 8 years old, and she's constantly asking her mom about death. Like, when are you going to die? When am I going to die? And these are very challenging questions to navigate with little ones. And so it also depends on your spiritual beliefs and your beliefs around death. But I did an intake with her, and it did come, like, she had lost a family member a year ago. And so that was kind of the trigger for that. So I like to go back to, when did something start? What was going on then for them? And we gave a homeopathic remedy. We also provided some tools around mindfulness and breathing. And whenever she's having like really negative emotions and feelings, to be able to use these tools right away. And I spoke with her mother a few months later, and she said that she is not so obsessive about it. She's not bringing it up as often. She's able to interact more and play more. She noticed a difference in that she's coming out of her shell. She's coming out of her shell a little bit. And also her digestion is improved, which was like a side effect of that. We think we're focusing on one thing, but with the right remedy or with the right treatment plan, you see improvements in so many different areas. So this is a child that was taking a laxative like very often from a young age, and that was experiencing improvement in digestive health. And whenever I see improvement in digestive health, I know that the psychological health, it's like the chicken and the egg with those. So that's really important for me to see. And I want to see your child thriving, because I know that they can. A lot of people are experiencing unprecedented stressors and pressures, and we all are experiencing unprecedented things in 2020. But I want 2020 to be the best year for you and your child, because you gained access to all these resources and techniques, and now you have more resilience. You have a higher threshold that no matter what is thrown at you, no matter what's going on in the world around you, you have your tools that you're able to gather yourself, take care of your nervous system and show up fully and be present. So I've included some other resources, some websites you can check out. The UCLA Children's Hospital has a lot of great resources, especially around the current COVID and lots of anxieties that are coming up around that. There's some worksheets, coping cards, progressive muscle relaxation, which is another mindfulness technique. There's some books for parents, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk is considered like a parenting Bible for one of my teachers promotes this book a lot. The Whole Brain Child talks more about that neural rewiring and circuitry. The Opposite of Worry is another book for anxious kiddos. Some activities for children. There's like a worry workbook that you can find free pages, but the best activity is going to be like getting outside and moving and creating things like that. There's another book that I didn't include for kids. It's called Alpha Breaths. And it's like an alphabet book, but each letter has its like breathing exercise. So it's like really fun to do. And after you read that book, it can really put you in a different mind state. Some apps I like to recommend are the tapping solution, which like I was talking about tapping or emotional freedom technique. You can just download the app and it has like for different emotions like grief is on there, whatever it may be, anxiety, different tapping techniques that you can do to help, again, self-regulate. Mindshift is another app that uses cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, and it's like developed by scientists and psychologists. So it's like a little bit more involved, but it's very effective because CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy is often a first line recommendation for a lot of these conditions. So it's helps with like situational events and things like that. And it's nice to have it in app form because it gives you a lot of resources. What's anxiety? What can I do? How to navigate different situations. I really like that. And Smiling Mind is another like meditation app. So it has meditations for like all ages, and I'm pretty sure it's free. Headspace is another one. I think that one's paid. But these are just like apps that can kind of support. We're on our phones a lot anyway, so it's nice to have some supportive things too in app form. And if there is anything else that you're interested in or want to ask about, or if you want notes to anything that I said, because I know what I said was kind of different from some of the slides, I'm happy to send those resources over.
Sure, sure. So thank you so much. We will take some questions from the audience. So I see quite a few questions coming up. We've put our email and website as well. If you cannot think of the questions now, you can always email us. But let's take a few questions. So someone is saying, when my husband and I fight, that puts a lot of pressure on my on the kid, 7-year-old. And we try not to fight in front of him, but obviously we had fought and we don't talk and he picks it up and gets anxious. So, we can end our fight just like that, but we don't want him to be stressed out. So what do we do?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And that is definitely good on the parent, good on, whoever's asking for making that connection and noticing and being so aware of what their child is feeling with these fights. So
Sonam, I can't hear you. We cannot hear you.
Oh, sorry. I don't know how that happened.
I don't
Can you
know
hear me
why.
now?
Yes. Now it's okay.
Okay, so I don't know how much y'all heard, but I was saying like kudos to the parent for recognizing that as a stressor for their child. Definitely minimizing the amount of conflict in front of the child, especially if the child is sensitive to it, which I don't know which child wouldn't be. And trying to keep that away from them, but also giving language to how they're feeling so the child can communicate as well. So modeling good communication for the child will help them too. So when you say, oh, mommy feels really frustrated when such and such happens, or like I'm feeling a little sad right now, and then like asking them like, how are you feeling, and opening up that line of communication can really help model really good communication between the family and between the child, so they can open up more rather than close off and hide um, and things like that. So I definitely recommend using language and giving them language for their emotions so they can understand a little bit more what they're feeling and have the words to express themselves, and also trying to model good communication with their partner as well.
So a follow up for that is, he says, end your fight, else I cry at night. You know that.
Oh, yeah, that's, I feel like that might be, if it's getting to the point where the parents can't avoid having these conflict in front of the child, it might take a little bit more help. It might take a little bit of counseling, a little bit more support for the parents as well, because I'm sure they're under significant stress too. It might be helpful to have somebody on board to help
Yeah.
support the whole family, and so everybody can get their needs met.
It's hard nowadays, I mean, for all of us, not to fight with each other, whoever is I mean,
Fine.
it's difficult for all of us, and we have to support each other, in the sense, like, we have to recognize, it's part of the emotions that can be let out, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is why it always comes back to us. Like, what are we feeling? If we are pouring from an empty cup, we're not helping anyone. That's why we have to really, I tell all my moms and the parents that I work with, like, what are you doing for you? How are you taking care of yourself? What are your self-care practices? I need you to feel strong and resilient and good, because it doesn't serve the rest of the family if you're coming from a very just stressed out, nervous system completely taxed, burnout place, because
Yeah.
then you're going to snap at others. You're going to get irritable with others too. And it
Okay,
makes
we
sense.
have another question. Yeah, we have another question. So you did talk about the diet, when we were talking about what to do, what are the takeaways. So someone is asking, any time, if they can get the names and writing of the helpful things to have in the diet. Can you
Sure, sure.
expand a little bit right now, and so that it's a recorded session, they can take it
Yeah,
afterward, or if you want to email me, I can email them. It's up to you. If you
sure.
can talk for 30 seconds on something.
Yeah, we can do both if you want. So helpful things to include in the diet: whole foods, things if it comes from a box, a bag, or a can, try to limit those. That means it's processed. Anything that's super refined has become very far from its original state. So whole foods, whole fruits, whole vegetables. The most natural, try to shop, they say, on the periphery of the grocery store, where that's where you get like the fruits and the vegetables and the produce and the dairy and things like that. And again, dairy might be a fit for some kids and not for others. But whole foods is generally a really good rule of thumb. Avoiding those artificial sugars, additives, those things they build up over time, and we're seeing a lot of research around like glyphosate. So I also recommend organic whenever you can. Pesticides can build up in the brain. And there's research, this is actually my research is in Parkinson's, but it builds up, and they're saying that glyphosate is found more in like brains that have Alzheimer's and dementia and things like that. So we're kind of all in this like big social scientific experiment. We're seeing the impacts of it now, and later we will too. So anyway, avoid those if you can. Try to eat organic, whole foods. I recommend omega-3s. So it's harder for kids to swallow pills, or I don't like to recommend supplements a lot in general. I think the more you can get from your food, the better. And for kids especially, they're not going to swallow pills and all of that. So incorporating nice fatty fishes, that can be huge for getting omega-3s and so many just really great source of protein and vitamins and minerals. My kid, I have a 2-year-old who loves like fish in any form. Like his pediatrician asked what he likes to eat, and he's like, fish curry. It's like, we don't see many 2-year-olds saying that. But anyway, fish is great if you can get them into that. Protein in general, if you can get like good sources of quality grass-fed meats or organic, or if there's nothing else you do organic, try to get organic dairy, because there's just so much that goes into dairy. It becomes very processed. That's one that I definitely recommend, and that can be a good source of protein for some kids. And stay hydrated. Make sure that they're drinking enough water. A lot of them are drinking juices and sodas and things that aren't really helping them hydrate very well. So sometimes headaches and fatigue and all these things can just be lack of hydration. So very simple, clean water, good protein, and fiber, so which you can get from fruits and vegetables. Definitely recommend those. I can send more in-depth
Sure.
notes and guidelines. And also, like I said, it's individualized. So it kind of depends on the kid too. If your kid doesn't eat certain things or is picky about certain things, we can be creative and figure that out too.
Okay, well, I hope that answers your question. Any other questions from the audience who's in Zoom? I just want to make sure these are educational sessions, and some of the so we are here to answer your questions. So please feel free to ask any more questions. Okay. Well, let us know how you like our session. Okay, so then someone is just saying their child is very shy in front of other people. So,
Yeah. So this is common. This is very common. A lot of children are very shy in front of other people. They want to cling on to their parents. That can be very normal. And like I said, it depends. Like, how much is this interfering with their life? Are they so shy that they become mute? Some children will stop talking. We had a case where she was like 3 years old and she stopped talking completely. And she was talking before, and for years she would not say anything. And they asked, is there trauma? Is there something happen? And so it just became completely quiet. So this would require a little bit more of an in-depth intake. I would want to ask a lot more questions and see what was going on when it started, things like that. Just doing very small exposure things, like something, getting them slowly comfortable, really working with them. Also being very open, be their safe space. Be very, don't be overcritical, don't overcorrect. A lot of times that negative voice in their head, is that parent's voice or family member's voice or thing. We don't want to be that negative voice in their head. We want to help them, support them, and feel more confident, not be the one that's criticizing them and making them feeling worse about how they're already feeling kind of stressed.
Yeah. If you wanted a detailed more information, you can email us. I've put our email in the chat window for everyone. Okay. All right. So if there are no more questions, any other questions before we wrap up? I just want to make sure we give the opportunity to all the attendees to ask any questions. These are general questions. And let us know how we are doing. Please give us the feedback on our sessions as well. And you like our sessions, please share them, to help promote natural therapies. And that's what we request. Any final comments from you, Dr. Sonam, before we wrap up?
I just want everyone to know that you and your child can thrive regardless of the condition. That is my big message. There are many, many things you can do, and you don't need to do them all. Just pick one thing. Just pick like one little change that you can make, and you will see it will build up. It will have a compounding effect over time. So just because they're simple doesn't mean that they're not very effective. So try to figure something out that you can incorporate in your life, and don't feel overwhelmed. I want you to feel like you have more control. That's my hope, that you feel like a little bit more in control, and your child can also feel a little bit more in control. That's going to really help their anxiety for sure.
Well, thank you so much. I hope that this session has made all the parents less anxious. There's hope, and that's what Dr. Sonam is saying, and there's hope for each one of us. So with that, I'd like to wrap up this session. Thank you so much for attending the session. Thank you, Dr. Sonam. Signing off now. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. You too. Bye.